Hi, my name is Borem. In this lesson, I want to talk about unit of work pattern. I want to show you how I implement unit of work around Entity Framework and the benefits of using it. For a while ago now, I wrote an article on Code Project called Very Thin Database Layer using unit of work pattern and Entity Framework. Today, we're going to do pretty much the same thing, so if you prefer reading instead, the article can be found on Code Project. You can find a link in the description below as well. Today I'm going to use tools like Visual Studio 2017 and Entity Framework 6.2. We're going to start by creating a blank solution and adding 3 different layers, where each layer is in its own project. I'm going to start by a blank solution and adding the application layer, which is going to be an API, web API, the service layer and the database layer as a class library. During the time I write code and I add those layers, I'm going to fast forward it so that I can walk you through code instead. Before I start writing code, I want to compare solutions with unit of work and without unit of work pattern. On our left side screen, we have the solution without unit of work, where the controller calls the DB context for reading and writing data into a database. This comes with a cost, since we are going to add a reference of the DB context on each of our controllers. So in future, if we want to change ORM, we need to work on much wider scope. I know that it's not often you change ORM, but imagine a case where Microsoft release a new version of Entity Framework with breaking changes. If we don't have unit of work, we will need to go in each controller and make our changes. Solution with a unit of work will create an abstraction between our controller and the DB context. So we're going to use unit of work that calls the repository, and the repository will use DB context for reading and writing data into database. The abstractions that we create here will help us manage DB context much easier if we want to change version of it. It will be easier to mock and write unit tests. I'm going to start writing code now and fast forward that part, and I will get back to you right after I'm done with it. Now that I'm done writing code, I want to show you what I've done until now. If we start with the database layer, we can see that we have our database context here, which inherits from DB context that comes from Entity Framework and implements iDatabase context. I have pulled up 4 of the methods that I need from our DB context. These are the 4 methods that we're going to need for reading and writing data into database. Those 4 methods are defined here, and this is the way how I pull methods up from our DB context. I have overridden the onModelCreating method as well for adding the configuration that we need for our classes. Configuration for our classes I usually have separate files because it's easier to handle those, and our onModelCreating won't be very long, as I've seen in many projects. So if we navigate again to person map, I call it map since I map our class against table. I inherit from entity type configuration and type of our person model, and on our constructor I defined the key of the key as a primary key, our ID property. Here I can define our different relations as well, but since I have only one model here, I won't be able to have any more configuration on our file. On our generic repository, I have 2 methods, one for adding new row into our database and The other one is for finding rows from or reading rows or data from our database. When we create one generic repository, we need one database context, since the database context is used by repository for reading and writing data. If we go to our unit of work, we can see that when we create our unit of work, we will create the DB context and create one repository instance as well and pass the DB context to our repository. Both the repository and our DB context are saved globally in our unit of work. This is since we always going to access repository from our unit of work, and unit of work will be responsible for saving changes and disposing the DB context. So since our unit of work inherits from iDisposable, we have to implement dispose method here. This is the unit of work factory, and I'm gonna tell you why I've created that just right after I show you the service layer. But before I go ahead and talk about service layer, I want to show you that I have created or added a new project called data contract. I use this project for saving contracts that I use on our application layer. I usually have this as a separate project in case I need to share contract with a different application. This will be a little easier for me, having those in a separate project. If we go ahead and see what I've implemented on our person service, you can see that I have injected an unit of work factory. The reason for that is I don't want to create a unit of work here as soon as I create one person service. The reason for that is if I create one unit of work, it will create a DB context or database context directly. But having a unit of work factory, it will create a unit of work only when I need it. So as you can see here, I have used unit of work factory for creating unit of work and have it within the using so that it will dispose it right after I'm done with it. When we call the method add new person async, we will create a unit of work, add the model to our database, and commit and save changes using unit of work. We never use repository for saving changes, as I've seen in different projects. Searching persons, our method will create unit of work and dispose it right after we're done with it. So this is, for me, this is the thumb rule when I work with a database context. I create one right before I want to work or read data from database, and I dispose it right after I'm done with it. On our controller, I have injected iPerson service, which is implemented by a person service. As you can see, I always have one interface for our services or even unit of work and repository. This is the reason why I will always be able to mock those dependencies and write unit tests much easier, as we spoke when we compared the solutions. If I would have the DB context injected here or created within the method, it will be much harder for us to write unit tests, since we won't be able to mock the DB context in that case. When we want to add a new person, I always check if the model state is valid. If it's not valid, I return bad request and tell the user that model is invalid. I use data annotations for validating the model. I have cached an exception, but since this is only a demo, I don't log it, but it will be good if you log it, and always return a generic exception that tells your consumer that something is wrong when an exception occurs, and not sending the real exception. That's something that I don't recommend. This is what I've done until now. This is how I plan. If you want to try this, you can always go to Code Project and download the code and try it in your local computer. I hope this explains in an overview how I think when I plan the unit of work. Please comment below and tell me if you like this video or not, or should I continue, or maybe should I change something. Thank you very much and have a great continue.